There are cities that sleep, and then there is New Orleans, a place where the air itself feels heavy with the scent of magnolias and old secrets. A soft place where the boundary between the living and the dead is dangerously thin. It is a city that captures both the old world and the new, a never-ending nightlife fueled by a collision of African, French, and American cultures. But beneath the jazz and the cuisine lies a shadow that stretches back over 200 years. You might think you know the history of the South, but there is a figure here who defies the history books. A woman who has been dead for 2 centuries, yet maintains a grip on the city so tight that locals still whisper her name with a mixture of reverence and fear. They say she walks the alleyways of the French Quarter, a phantom queen who can grant miracles or destroy lives from beyond the grave. But the terrifying truth is not just about magic. It is about something far more dangerous: information. Before we can understand the spells and the rituals that would make her infamous, we have to unravel the paradox of Marie Laveau, the Voodoo Queen, a woman whose power was so absolute that it begs a question that haunts historians to this day. Was she a sorceress capable of bending the laws of physics? Or was she the greatest Grand Master of espionage the city had ever seen? To understand the legend, we must first look into the mirror of a city drowning in superstition, where separating the facts from the myth is a task that has baffled scholars for generations. The origin of a myth is rarely simple, and Marie Laveau's beginning is shrouded in the fog of the bayou. We know she was likely born in 1801, a child of 2 worlds, the daughter of a wealthy white plantation owner, Charles Laveau, who would later become a mayor of New Orleans, and his black mistress, Marguerite, a woman herself whispered to be a practitioner of the old ways. From the moment she took her first breath, Marie was a creature of duality, walking the line between the aristocracy and the enslaved, between the cathedral and the ritual circle. She grew into a woman of striking, almost disarming beauty, described in the tablets of the time as having good features, a coded phrase meaning she possessed the physical traits of a white woman, tall with dark curly hair and golden skin that seemed to glow in the Louisiana sun. She married a carpenter named Jacques Paris, a union that should have been the start of a quiet domestic life. But the city of New Orleans has a way of swallowing men whole. In 1824, Jacques Paris vanished, simply ceased to exist. Marie, with a pride that would become her trademark, claimed to be a widow, speaking of his death with a solemnity that discouraged questions, though many suspected he had merely deserted her, and she was too proud to admit the abandonment. But it was in the vacuum of this loss, in the silence of her empty home, that the true Marie Laveau began to emerge, not as a grieving widow, but as a woman calculating her ascent. It is here that we must slow down and look closely at the specific mechanism of her rise, because it was not initially built on blood or bones, but on vanity. After the disappearance of Paris, Marie began working as a hairdresser, a profession that sounds mundane until you understand the social architecture of 19th century New Orleans. Picture the scene inside the boudoirs of the wealthy white and Creole women. The air is thick with powder and perfume, the shutters are drawn against the heat, and the guards are down. In this intimate space, as Marie's hands worked through their hair, the social barriers dissolved. These women, trapped in the gilded cages of their marriages, found a confidant in the beautiful hairdresser with the golden skin. They spoke of things they would never dare utter in public: the illicit lovers, the secret deaths, the illegitimate children, the hatred they harbored for their husbands, the intimate details of family estates and political maneuvers. Marie listened. She absorbed every whisper, every scandal, every hidden desire, compiling a mental library of the city's darkest secrets. This was the foundation of her empire. Before she ever lit a candle or summoned a spirit, she possessed leverage. She held the reputation of the city's elite in the palm of her hand, and many historians believe this wealth of information was the true source of her magical omniscience, the reason she could predict the future or reveal the past with such terrifying accuracy. She was building a surveillance state in a beauty parlor, preparing to weaponize the sins of the aristocracy against them. But information alone does not make a queen. For that, she needed a crown, and she found it in the shadowy, misunderstood world of voodoo. She began a relationship with Louis Christophe Dumigny de Glapion, a man from a powerful local family, with whom she would birth 15 children, securing her place in the social fabric. But simultaneously, she turned her gaze toward her mother's heritage. Voodoo in Louisiana was viewed by the white establishment as the art of the devil, a sinister force meant to usurp Christianity and lead good souls down a dark path of blasphemy. But this was a gross embellishment born of fear and ignorance. Marie saw the power in this fear. She sought out a mysterious mentor known only as Dr. John, a voodoo doctor of insidious reputation, and began to learn the craft. But Marie was a visionary. She didn't just practice voodoo, she rebranded it. She understood that to rule New Orleans, she had to bridge the gap between the African roots of the religion and the devout Catholicism of the upper class. She infused her rituals with holy water, incense, statues of saints, and Christian prayers, creating a syncretic blend that was palatable to the wealthy and compelling to the devout. She was constructing a religion that she alone could control, positioning herself as the gatekeeper between the citizens of New Orleans and the spiritual forces that could bless them or destroy them. She was no longer just a hairdresser. She was becoming the high priestess of a city that was slowly realizing it was already under her spell. To understand the grip Marie Laveau held over the Crescent City, you must first understand the atmosphere of the nights she commanded. Nights where the humid air of the bayou seemed to thicken with intent. She did not merely practice voodoo. She curated a theatrical experience that blurred the lines between the divine and the profane, creating a spectacle that was equal parts religious ceremony and psychological warfare. Historians note that what separated her brand of Louisiana voodoo from the traditional voodoo of Haiti was the seamless infusion of Catholic iconography. She understood the psyche of her audience, knowing that to gain acceptance among the upper class and the devout, she had to cloak the old African gods in the vestments of Christian saints. Her altars were not just covered in bones and blood, but with holy water, burning incense, and statues of the Virgin Mary, creating a visual language that was terrifyingly familiar, yet utterly alien to the white aristocracy. The rituals were visceral affairs, driven by a mixture of hypnotic drumming, frenetic dancing, and singing that was designed to summon the spirits, or loa, inviting them to ride the bodies of the participants. The belief was that these spirits, who could be as benign as a summer breeze or as mischievous as a poltergeist, would connect with the followers, imparting divine knowledge or guiding their hands. And at the center of this swirling vortex of energy stood Marie, often depicted with a massive pet snake coiled around her neck, a serpent she affectionately named Zombie. Picture the image that seared itself into the minds of the locals. A woman of golden skin, eyes flashing in the firelight, whispering to a python while the city slept. a living embodiment of the power that lay just outside the boundaries of their polite society. But Marie Laveau was not just a priestess. She was a merchant of fate. Her influence extended beyond the rituals and into the pockets of the people through the sale of gris-gris bags, small amulets originating from Africa that were believed to dictate the course of one's life. These were not mere trinkets. They were complex spiritual technologies. Pouches filled with a variety of specific ingredients, roots, bones, stones, and herbs, each blessed by the Voodoo Queen herself to bring fortune, protect the wearer from evil, or manipulate the desires of a lover. She sold charms to cure ailments, magical powders to confound enemies, and desire-granting ornaments that promised to bend reality to the buyer's will. If you had a rival you wished to destroy, or a court case you needed to win, you went to Marie. She conducted spiritual readings, telling fortunes, and giving advice that was so eerily accurate it sent shivers down the spines of those who sought her counsel. However, this accuracy brings us back to the darker, more skeptical interpretation of her legacy. Many historians argue that her divine knowledge was not whispered to her by spirits, but was the product of the most sophisticated intelligence network the South had ever known. Consider the geography of power in a 19th-century plantation home. The masters and mistresses lived their lives in front of an invisible audience, their servants. The enslaved men and women who cooked the meals, changed the bedsheets, and stood silently in the corners of drawing rooms, heard everything. They knew who was sleeping with whom, who was drowning in debt, and who was terrified of their own shadow. The theory suggests that Marie Laveau, with her warm and compassionate persona, cultivated a deep loyalty among these servants, or perhaps she used her reputation to instill a fear so deep that they felt compelled to report to her. Some accounts suggest she would threaten to hex or curse the servants if they did not divulge the secrets of their masters, while others claim she simply paid them off. This effectively turned every grand household in New Orleans into a listening post for the Voodoo Queen. When a wealthy client came to her for a reading, trembling and desperate, Marie likely already knew their problem before they opened their mouth. She could reveal hidden truths about their lives that no stranger should know, cementing her reputation as an all-knowing mystic. She was playing a game of psychological dominance, using the information she gathered to further her own status, building a legend that was self-sustaining. But whether her power came from the spirits or from spies, the result was the same. When Marie Laveau spoke, New Orleans listened. And nowhere was this power more evident and more terrifying than in the story of the wealthy man's son, a tale of impossible odds that would become the cornerstone of her legend. The story begins with a situation that seemed hopeless, the kind of legal catastrophe that money usually solves, but which in this case seemed destined for tragedy. A wealthy man's son had been accused of a heinous crime, a rape allegation that carried a severe, long jail sentence. The evidence against the young man was described as damning. It was an open and shut case where the gavel seemed ready to fall before the trial even began. The father, a man of influence and means, found himself hitting a wall. His connections, his lawyers, his bribes, nothing was working. Desperation is a powerful hallucinogen, and it drove this pillar of society to the doorstep of the woman his church warned him against. He went to Marie Laveau. He didn't ask for a lawyer, he asked for a miracle. In exchange for her aid, For the freedom of his son against impossible odds, he offered her a house, a piece of prime real estate that would solidify her physical presence in the city. Marie accepted the deal. But she didn't just cast a spell and wait. She prepared for a ritual that would require a level of physical endurance and psychological intensity that most could not fathom. A ritual involving the fire of Hades itself. To comprehend the lengths to which Marie Laveau would go to secure her power, one must visualize the interior of her ritual chamber on the eve of the trial. A scene of deliberate, agonizing self-torture that defies modern sensibility. She did not merely pray. She offered her own physical suffering as a currency to the spirits. The legend tells us she took 3 guinea peppers, capsicums so volatile they were described as being hotter than Hades, and placed them directly into her mouth. But she did not swallow them. For hours she held these blistering coals against her tongue and cheeks, enduring the chemical burn, the swelling, and the blinding pain without uttering a sound. In the theology of voodoo, the spirits are not servants. They are observers who must be moved to pity. And the belief is that when the gods see a willingness to suffer, a willingness to sacrifice one's own comfort for a desire, they pay attention. Marie sat in the sweltering heat of the New Orleans night, her mouth a furnace of agony, channeling every ounce of that pain into a singular intent, the liberation of the condemned boy. It was a test of will that transcended simple magic and entered the realm of fanatical endurance, a physical manifestation of her commitment to the deal she had struck. On the morning of the hearing, while the city was still wiping the sleep from its eyes, Marie Laveau moved with the silence of a ghost into the courthouse. She didn't storm the doors with chants or drums. She infiltrated the space with the subtlety of a spy. She made her way to the judge's bench, the seat of absolute authority in the room, and there she placed the guinea peppers, the very same ones that had been marinating in her mouth and her intent for hours, hidden directly under his seat. The trial commenced, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. The evidence was presented, the same damning facts that should have sent the wealthy man's son to prison for a lifetime. But something in the equation had broken. The judge, a man of logic and law, began to falter. Some say the energy from the spiritually enhanced peppers radiated upward, clouding his judgment, or perhaps clarifying a mercy that wasn't there before. Against all precedent and reason, the judge banged his gavel and set the man's son free. The courtroom erupted in shock, but Marie Laveau simply watched. The wealthy father, stunned and grateful, made good on his promise, granting Marie the deed to a house on St. Anne's Street, a physical monument to the miracle she had orchestrated. However, when we pull back the curtain of mysticism, a colder, more cynical narrative begins to take shape. One that paints Marie not as a sorceress, but as a master manipulator of human corruption. Historians and skeptics argue that if this event truly took place, the peppers were merely a prop, a piece of theater designed to distract the public from the gritty reality of the situation. The theory posits that Marie didn't need magic to sway the judge because she already owned him. Through her network of spies, the hairdressers, the maids, the carriage drivers, it is highly probable that she knew the judge personally. Or, more dangerously, she knew something incriminating about him. Perhaps she knew of a mistress, a gambling debt, or a hidden vice that, if revealed, would destroy his career. In this version of history, the magic was blackmail. The peppers under the seat were not a spiritual conduit, but a message, a reminder of her presence and her power to burn his life to the ground if he did not comply. She used her voodoo theatrics to convince the public of her supernatural abilities, while simultaneously using political intimidation to pull the strings of the city's justice system. It was a perfect duality. To the masses, she was a witch. To the elite, she was a broker of secrets who could not be touched. When the end finally came for the Voodoo Queen in 1881, the city held its breath. She was said to have died with a smile on her face, a final enigmatic expression that seemed to mock the mortal world she was leaving behind. But interestingly, the obituary columns did not vilify her as a sinister practitioner of the dark arts. Instead, the reporters of the time eulogized her as the kindest woman who ever lived, a saintly figure who had spent her life nursing the sick, comforting the condemned, and spreading compassion among the diseased. It was a jarring pivot from the feared sorceress to the benevolent matron, proving that even in death, Marie Laveau refused to be defined by a single narrative. She was buried in the St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 in the Laveau-Glapion family crypt, a site that would soon transform into a pilgrimage ground for the desperate and the superstitious. Even today, the vaults are marked by visitors, but not with flowers alone. For decades, a rumor persisted that if you marked an X on her tomb, turned around 3 times, knocked on the stone, and yelled out your wish, the Voodoo Queen would grant it from beyond the grave. If the wish came true, the petitioner was bound by a spectral contract to return, circle their X, and leave an offering, ensuring that even in death, Marie Laveau continued to conduct business with the living. But as the years passed, a new figure would emerge from the shadows to claim her mantle, a successor who would twist the legacy of the mother into something far darker. The legend of the Voodoo Queen did not die with the mother. Instead, it mutated, passing down to a successor who would strip away the veneer of saintliness to reveal the raw, terrifying power beneath. One of her daughters, also named Marie Laveau, picked up the mantle after 1881. By all accounts, she was a doppelganger, the splitting image of her mother in physical form, possessing the same dark curls and golden skin, but the soul behind the eyes was different. Where the mother was remembered for her warmth and her nursing of the sick, the daughter was said to lack that spirit entirely. Marie Laveau II did not deal in compassion. She was more inclined to inspire fear, ruling not through love, but through the cold application of intimidation. She understood that while her mother had built a bridge between the races and classes, she could build a fortress. She became a figure of hedonism and absolute authority, known for her ability to fulfill the darkest desires of any man who crossed her threshold. This shift in power materialized in the Maison Blanche, a notorious building where the racial segregation laws of New Orleans were left at the door. Here, Marie Laveau II held lavish, secret parties for a congregation of blacks and whites, where politicians, high officials, and the wealthy elite would watch women dance naked in a trance-like state. It was essentially a brothel woven with magic, a place where vice was sanctified by voodoo. And yet, despite the flagrant violation of laws and morals, the Maison Blanche was never raided by the police. The authorities, hardened men of the law, were too terrified to intervene, fearing that if they crossed the threshold of Marie II's domain, she would curse them, bringing ruin upon their families. Her reign was one of unchecked influence until nature itself intervened. The story goes that Marie Laveau II met her end not in a bed surrounded by loved ones, but in the violent waters of a lake, drowning in the aftermath of a massive storm. Since then, both Maries have sunk into the obscurity of the grave, yet they refuse to leave the city. Gamblers in New Orleans still shout her name when throwing dice for high stakes, and tales of sightings of the Voodoo Queen persist to this day, leaving locals to wonder which Marie they are seeing, the saint who heals or the sinner who haunts. So we are left with the haunting realization that transforms this story from a ghost tale into a psychological paradox. We want to believe that Marie Laveau was a sorceress because magic is a comfortable explanation for the impossible. It is easier to believe she had a deal with the devil than to accept the reality that she was simply smarter than everyone else. The irony is that her magic was likely not supernatural at all, but the first true surveillance state. She didn't need spirits to know the judge's secrets. She had the hairdressers, the maids, and the carriage drivers. She weaponized information in an era before data privacy existed, turning the gossip of the Salon into the leverage of a queen. She proves that knowledge, when applied with theatrical precision, is indistinguishable from sorcery. This brings the mirror up to our own faces. We look back at the clients of Marie Laveau with judgment, thinking them foolish for spilling their secrets to a voodoo queen. Yet we do the exact same thing every day. We confess our desires, our locations, and our fears not to a woman in a parlor, but to the algorithms that live in our pockets. We trade our privacy for convenience, just as they traded their secrets for charms. We are all walking into Marie Laveau's salon, sitting in the chair and waiting for a miracle, forgetting that the one holding the scissors also holds the power to destroy us. So I leave you with this choice. If you were in that courtroom, facing a life sentence with no hope of escape, would you choose the honest path and accept your fate? Or would you kneel before the Voodoo Queen, trade your freedom for a lie, and let her place the peppers of corruption beneath the judge's seat? Do you want the truth that kills you, or the magic that saves you? Choose carefully, because once you invite the supernatural in, it rarely leaves without a price. Join us next time as we leave the bayous of Louisiana for the cobblestone streets of Prague, where a rabbi, desperate to protect his people, will sculpt a defender out of clay, only to watch his creation turn into a monster of uncontrollable violence. Subscribe to survive the awakening of the golem